Hello everybody and welcome to this part of our training session. I'm delighted that I have with me today Dr. Elizabeth Vibert, who is a professor of history at the University of Victoria. And she's also a member of a constituent group that is working with the Intercultural Association. I'm Sabine Lehr. I'm the manager of the Private Sponsorship of Refugees program at the Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria. And Elizabeth is a member of a constituent group that is working with ICA. And Elizabeth has very kindly agreed to share some recommendations and some insights that she has gained from having been in this process now for a while. Elizabeth's group received the family that they are sponsoring in early March of 2016. So it's now been about 3 months that the family has been here. And I think she has a lot of thoughts to share on preparation for arrival, what she, in hindsight, might have wanted to do differently, and maybe what ideas she has for all of you as you go forward. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So maybe I'll start by asking you, planning is obviously a big part of the process and people try to be as prepared as they possibly can. Many people are planning a lot. They are reading a lot of things. How much planning did you do before the family's arrival? And when the family finally arrived, did you feel over-prepared or did you feel under-prepared? And why was that the case?
We did a lot of planning first and foremost for fundraising. So we started the process toward sponsoring a Syrian refugee family in September. And we heard with the outcome of the federal election in October that this process could happen quickly. So we had to step quickly into gear for fundraising. And in the city of Victoria, with ICA's advice and careful sort of budgeting, we worked out that we had to raise over $50,000 for a family of 5, the family that we were assigned. So that was quite a tall order at a time when a lot of other groups were also fundraising. Our early kind of planning was around raising the appropriate funds. We were happily very successful with that, with a big fundraising auction in particular. So then by December, we had this auction, and then we could shift our gears toward other kinds of planning, such things as how to equip an apartment for the new arrivals, what kinds of, material support they were going to need the minute they arrived. So we did that kind of planning in advance. And then as we moved into the new year, we quickly found out the family would arrive soon. They arrived the 29th of February, the 2nd of March, they got to Victoria. So the big planning in advance was the fundraising, getting the funds in place to support them through their first year, with monthly support and so on, and then the material, the money that was needed for their settling in. But there was also a great deal of planning around donations in kind, so furniture and all the other things that are needed to equip an apartment. And because we were involved in the process early, we were incredibly fortunate to have very generous donations in kind of everything from beds to kitchen supplies to, personal supplies and masses of clothing. But I think that piece might be a bit different going forward, given that, the big rush to support Syrian newcomers was in the early months of this year for sponsorship groups that are thinking of doing this from now on. It might be more difficult to tap into those kinds of donations. So that would be a kind of forward planning that groups would really have to think about. You asked, once the family arrived, did we feel sufficiently prepared?
Yeah, so, and also beyond the more material aspects of preparation, you've talked quite a bit about the material aspects, be it the fundraising, so getting the funds into place, but also furniture and things to equip the apartment. But often we get asked by sponsors or potential sponsors, what about those non-material aspects?
Yes.
What about expectations? Expectations always come up. Like, did you feel that you had a good handle on the expectations that the family might have had when they arrived of you as the group, or that you as the group might have had of the family? How did your planning, your thoughts prior to arrival map onto the realities of the situation?
I think our expectations of what the family would expect of us, our sense of what the family would expect of us, was fairly reasonable. We're a large group, so we had a lot of people who wanted to do things to welcome the family, particularly at the time of welcoming. Coming to the airport, we had people sort of fighting for those spots. We didn't want to take too many people and overwhelm the family at the airport. So for the early arrival, early welcoming, we had a lot of people stepping up to help. So the family felt really well supported in those days. They didn't have to go anywhere by themselves. They were accompanied on buses. They were shown the bus routes. They were taken to school to sign up the kids at school. All of those kinds of things they were accompanied for. And they had a whole list of numbers of people to contact, how to contact us. We got their phones set up early and so on. So they felt really well supported. We made a book for the family in advance. This was the idea of one of our group members, with photos of our members and a little write-up about the members, and then the contact information.
That's excellent.
So they had this album, which I noticed every time I went to their place, they generally had it out on the coffee table, ready to refer to. And if anyone dropped over to drop off some food or take them to an appointment, they could quickly look in the book and see who that person was.
That's really an excellent idea for people to, because, it's bewildering. The faces, also the names that are very, very unusual usually for the people that are being sponsored. And often you have a very large group, right? There's over 20 people.
There's about 20 people
in your group.
Yes.
So for you, it's learning 5 new names. For the family, it's potentially learning 20 names in the sponsorship group alone,
plus their family
let
members.
Alone all the other
right.
people they interact with.
So that book, which I think was a brilliant idea on the part of one of our group members, that book had those little write-ups in English and Arabic, and it gave them a little bit of connection to us. Oh, they have 3 children as well, or oh, they have children of similar age, or oh, this person works in a field similar to mine, that sort of thing. It gave them that kind of connection, but most importantly, it gave them the contact information. So I think that their expectations of what we would provide were possibly even exceeded in those early days and few weeks. Our expectations of the family were I'm very happily met. I mean, they were, I'm sure this wouldn't be the case with every family. This family was very happy to be socially engaged with us. They really enjoyed that. We organized, some social events, some potluck type events or gatherings at the park where the kids could play or whatever, and they were very eager to do that. There will be lots of families that won't be in that place, that will have come from a more immediate upheaval, will just need to catch their breath, maybe have peace and quiet. So you'd really have to think about what circumstances the family was coming from, and gauge by their response how ready they are to launch into social events or not.
Yeah.
So I think our expectations lined up well, but that won't always be the case, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so can I pick up on something you said? You talked about your group and it being rather large, and people being very eager to jump in. In some of our groups that we're working with, we're seeing group dynamics develop that are somewhat challenging to maneuver and to manage. And I don't know, maybe that wasn't the case in your group, but do you have any suggestions for people how to kind of deal with group dynamics? And, sometimes people are very keen to do something and maybe another person wants to do the same thing and things are not always well coordinated. Do you have any kind of advice for people on that?
Yes, I do have some advice. I'm not a very good delegator, So I think that as the sort of liaison person with the ICA and one of the leaders of the group, I maybe had a tendency to take on the organizing myself. So if I knew, I mean, it's often easier if you just do it yourself. So if I knew such and such an appointment was at this time at the afternoon, my first response was to try to make myself available. Okay. I wouldn't recommend that. Some burnout can happen, but also I think a few group members may have felt a little bit sidelined, especially if they signed up for a particular task and then that task was done not necessarily by me, but by someone else that I could quickly reach. So I know some smaller groups, like I know a group of 7 that's been very effective with dividing up the tasks. And I would recommend trying to stick to that. I mean, we did that. We assigned the tasks, the various tasks of settlement, getting doctors, signing up with a doctor, getting the kids enrolled at school, showing them the bus routes and so on. We did have those things assigned to particular people. But when the moment came to do those things, those people, A, weren't always available because it's Wednesday at 2 and they're at work. Or, as I said, it was sometimes just easier to phone a person whose number I had and say, can you do this tomorrow? And I ended up doing probably too much of that and maybe taking tasks away from the people who meant to be doing them, which I didn't hear this from anyone, but I suspect some people may have felt a little bit sidelined. On the other hand, we had these social events where everyone was welcome, and so everyone got to meet the family multiple times if they wanted to. But I'm sure I've heard from some other groups, there can be almost like a certain competitiveness around being with the family. Yeah. This weekend we're having them to dinner. Yeah. No, we've already invited them, that sort of thing. So be prepared for some of that. Yeah. We did early on have a Google Doc calendar, but it was a bit of a cumbersome thing to work with, and we were having to calendar a kind of a month's worth of activities, so people weren't really referring to it. If you could find a way to make that sort of a document readily usable and readable, kind of at a glance, I would recommend that. But that happened not to work very well for us. Yeah. So, yes, there can be different kinds of group dynamics. We had more than one person in charge of furniture, and they were finding furniture in different places and ending up, we had way too many beds at one point. So you want to have some clear coordination around those kinds of things. Yeah. And that can cause that sort of, I've already done that, why are you doing it again? In any group, in any volunteer group, can cause some tensions. And I mean, these are volunteer groups. There are going to be tensions. It's inevitable. So it's a good idea to have some good, clear lines of communication in place.
And that's really good advice. I wasn't asking you, to get the solution to this situation, but and different, as you were saying, different approaches might suit different groups. I know one group that has worked very effectively with technology. They use something called Basecamp, and they report that this is working very well for them. So it kind of depends on the dynamics. It's just to mention it so that, in advance, people know that they will need to deal with this situation, because we do have the very clear delineation of tasks in the settlement plan when we submit it. But I think it's important to recognize, like you're saying, that it doesn't always work out like that.
The person who's meant to be signing them up for school isn't available on the school morning when the principal's available. I mean, that's just going to happen. So with a large group, there are some pitfalls of a particularly large group, like 20. I think it was trickier for us to use, some people were calendaring what they were doing, others were not. If you had a group of 5 or 6, you might be able to sort of keep on people. Remember to put in that they're going to dinner at your house on Thursday evening. And then people will understand they should wait a few days before issuing another invitation. But with a large group, it was just trickier. I think a smaller group could do that well.
So, Elizabeth, let me ask you this question. If there's anything you wished you had known in advance, like before the family even arrived, and that you did not know, what would that be? And how could you have filled that gap? How could you have possibly acquired that knowledge that you feel you were missing before the family came?
The first thing that comes to mind is I wish I had researched, or we had researched, the very onerous requirements for requalifying in his profession that the father in the family we're sponsoring is facing. He's very determined to requalify in his profession, and his qualifications do not satisfy the Canadian government, so he has to go through a 2 to 3 year process of requalifying, which we were vaguely aware of and had researched a little bit at the point of their arrival, but I think it might have been helpful for us to have the difficult conversation around how onerous that process is going to be and how expensive it's going to be and how challenging for the family's finances. It might have been helpful to have that conversation early. We're just about to have it in full detail after 3.5 months. We've had it in pieces, but a couple of us are meeting with the father of the family just shortly to go through the full details. And on the other hand, though, when I laid out in very vague detail the process a couple of weeks after they arrived, it was clear that it was too much information at that moment. Right. So it's hard to say that it would have been, that he would have been capable of receiving it in the midst of all the upheaval and resettlement. So perhaps it was inevitable that we waited this long, but even for my own information, I think I would have preferred to have contacted the relevant deans. I wrote emails to deans across the country to see if, for instance, they were contemplating any accommodation of the Syrian newcomers. I might have been happier had I had all that information at my fingertips at the beginning. So that's one thing. I guess I would have benefited, or our group would have benefited, from knowing how long it takes the federal government to process the requests for the child benefit, and the provincial government to process the medical insurance coverage. It's been taking months. And we did as a group do those applications early, but I think we'd have made the effort to do them day 1 or day 2 had we known how long the process was going to take. It may be taking extra long because of the huge volume of Syrian newcomers in January and February, but it's been taking months to get those things cleared.
This is typical, yeah. Apart from that, what surprised you the most about the family after their arrival? Without going into personal details, is there something that kind of comes to mind that you hadn't anticipated at all, that came as a surprise for you?
There were a few small surprises. I'm sure some other groups have had more and larger surprises. One thing was that although this particular family had been relatively securely settled prior to coming, they hadn't been attending to medical and dental needs during the 4 years that they were refugees from Syria. So, eyeglasses are needed, badly needed, and they didn't have them. There hasn't been a lot of dental care in the last few years. So those appointments needed to be arranged right away. We maybe would have even arranged them in advance had we known that they were going to arrive with those needs. Just on a more personal level, I and some of the other group members have been surprised by the gender dynamics in the family. We had certain ill-founded and uninformed assumptions about gender dynamics in Muslim households. Really ill-founded, as it turns out. The relationship between the mom and dad in this family is something very close to egalitarian. I mean, a model for some Canadian households, I'm sure. So that was a pleasant surprise. And another surprise was around who has been having the most trouble with English language learning. So the parents, as university educated people, actually had high school English, and so they arrived with, being very, very rusty, but they had a foundation. So in fact, their English language learning has gone much faster than the children's. The children had no background.
Okay.
The children are bilingual in Arabic and Turkish because they've been going to school in Turkey. They had not even a few words of English. And the youngest child had the most challenge with that. And that surprised us. We thought maybe the teenager would have the most challenge, but because because of peer pressure and social dynamics in middle school, but in fact it's the youngest child that had the most has had the most challenges around English learning. So that was a surprise. The parents were best equipped. We always think the young learn fastest, but we're only 3 months in, 3.5 months in, but English language learning is a big challenge for all of them. They're devoting themselves to it very, diligently, but the levels are different than we expected.
This is very interesting information, and obviously I think what it teaches us all and reminds us all of that, it's always case by case. Every single case is different. Every single family is different. And we cannot really make lots of generalizations about people, because you're absolutely right. Generally speaking, that is what we are seeing, that the children have a much easier time acquiring the language than the parents. But in that particular composition and dynamic, and with the background that the people came with, it turned out differently. It turned out
to be the opposite, and the opposite of what we and maybe even you would have expected.
Absolutely.
Another point about surprises is that our assumption at the outset was because the parents are highly educated, they'd have a relatively easy time finding work. Right, it turns out it's people in the trades who are having the easiest time finding work. And people with university educations and professions are the ones who have to, if they want to work in their area, have to go through those really, onerous processes of requalification.
Yes, and that's really important to keep in mind for everybody, because people that have trades professions typically get by in those professions with a somewhat lower level of English, whereas people with those kinds of professions, like the people in the family you're sponsoring, need a high level of English to, apart from the recertification and all of that. Yes. So it's a long haul for those people.
Even to write the exam, to apply to requalify, the level of English has to be very high. So there's a long delay before even the exam can take place.
And if I may just add to that, so one resource that we recommend for the sponsorship groups to look at is the Alternative Careers website that Welcome BC hosts on the website of the Vancouver Public Library. And it's a very, very helpful tool showing people that come with these professional designations, medical doctors, dentists, pharmacists, lawyers, what kind of other career paths they might be able to take if they don't want to or can't go through the recertification process. So this is something also to look at. So maybe my final question, unless you have something else to add, is what are sort of the top 3 recommendations, let's say, you would give to our audience, to people that are starting the sponsorship process now, or maybe are expecting the family or the newcomers to arrive very soon? What are some of the things you would recommend?
I would recommend thinking about what skills or careers they're arriving with, and working with your networks. If it's a doctor who's coming, talk to doctor friends and the community of medical professionals about how they might, what the process of requalification is, and how the family, how the professional might be taken into that community or not. I would give thought in advance and wish we had to the skills and careers that people are arriving with. I suppose from now on, now that we're sort of through that bubble of the big welcome by the federal government of the 25 to 30,000 Syrian newcomers. Now that we're through that, and that the government and the public have moved through that, the challenges of fundraising and raising donations will be higher than they were at the moment when we were doing it. So you'd want to do lots of advance fundraising and lots of advance planning to be able to support the family through that first year. I would recommend thinking about how fast time passes, how quickly time passes. So we're really noticing the mom and dad in the family we're sponsoring being anxious about how quickly this year is passing. You know, it's a quarter to moving into a third gone. They're working hard on their English. The children are well settled in school, but the children have to continue working hard on their English, and the support runs out at the end of the year. And that deadline is facing them, staring them in the face, and they are really aware of it. So that's something to be aware of. You think at the outset, wow, we're going to provide this year of support, and it's so important to their settlement and their adaptation, and that's all very important and true, but it goes quickly. And the family that we're helping, they are very concerned about what their financial situation is going to look like, how they're going to support themselves. They're very keen to do so, and do so as quickly as possible, but time passes quickly. So for everyone to be on the same page about that, time is passing quickly, and the family may well be very anxious about the passage of that year. And that's a bit of a negative note. On a more positive note, I would say be prepared for the joy that comes from this process of being involved in resettling a family that's in such dire need and has been in such difficult circumstances for such a long time often. They will have many adjustment pains, as anyone would, moving to such an unknown place. But there's so much joy involved in being part of that journey. And from all the groups I've spoken to, the families are so pleased to be welcomed by folks who live in the community, and so warmly welcomed by the community. So that it really is a lovely process to be involved in.
And I think that's a really great note to end on, unless there's anything else you want to add that we haven't discussed in particular. But otherwise, I think that's a great note to end on and to send you all away with. And in spite of all the challenges that the process will pose, there's no question about that. And the difficulties, whether they are internally within the group or whether they are in your interactions with the newcomers, I think at the end of the day, that's what we mostly hear. It was all worth it, regardless of anything that happened. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. We really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with the newer sponsors, and we hope that this is helpful for all of you as you prepare for the arrival of the newcomers. Thank you very much.